My building superintendent called me on a Tuesday afternoon in October. I was in the garage sharpening my chisels, the way I always did when the season changed and the work slowed down. His voice was careful, measured, the way people sound when they're not sure they're doing the right thing. "Mr. Ashford," he said, "I don't know if I should be calling you about this, but a man came to the building today. He had papers. He said he had power of attorney over the property and wanted access to the rental files and the maintenance records going back 5 years. He paused. I told him to wait and he left. I didn't like the look of it. I put down the chisel. What did this man look like? He described him. Medium height, maybe 50. Good coat, leather briefcase. Very calm and professional. He gave a name I didn't recognize. "You did the right thing calling me," I said. "Don't let anyone into that building without my direct authorization. No one." I hung up and stood in my garage for a long moment. The October light came through the small window above the workbench. I had owned that building on Lanark Avenue in Ottawa for 19 years. I had redone the plumbing myself the first winter, crawling through the utility room in February with frozen pipes and breath I could see. I had never signed a power of attorney over that property to anyone in my life. My wife was in the kitchen when I came inside. She was on the phone, laughing at something. When she saw my face, she said a quick goodbye and set the phone on the counter. "Everything okay?" "Fine," I said. "Just work stuff." That was the first lie I told her, and I told it calmly, without hesitation, which surprised me. 64 years old, 41 years of marriage, and something inside me already knew before my mind had finished understanding what was happening. Her name is Margaret. We met in 1983 at a job site in Canada where I was doing rough framing, and her father was the project manager. She brought him lunch, and she had red hair, and she laughed at something I said that wasn't even particularly funny, and that was it for me. We were married 11 months later in a small church in El Monte, with 40 guests and a reception at her parents' farm. We had one daughter, Claire, who now lives in Kingston with her husband and their 2 boys. For 41 years, I thought I knew what our life was. I thought I knew what my wife was. I went upstairs and sat on the edge of the bed with the door closed. I called Gordon Reeves, who has been my lawyer since 1991, and who I trust more than almost anyone on earth. He's the kind of man who sounds the same at 8 in the morning as he does at 8 at night. Unruffled, precise, always thinking 2 steps ahead. He picked up on the second ring. "Gordon," I said, "I need you to check the land registry for the Lanark Avenue property and the Merivale Road duplex and the place in Menotic. Today, if possible." There was a pause. "What am I looking for?" "Any filings I didn't make. Any transfers, any liens, any power of attorney registrations. Anything that wasn't me." Another pause, longer this time. "Ray, what happened?" I told him about the superintendent's call. Gordon went quiet in a way that I recognized from 30 years of working with him. It was the quiet of a man who was already moving pieces on a board. "I'll call the registry office right now," he said. "Don't confront anyone. Don't say anything to Margaret. Don't call whoever this man is. Just wait for me." I waited. It took him 90 minutes. When he called back, his voice had changed in a way I couldn't quite name. Flatter, more careful. "Ray, I need you to come to my office tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. And I need you to bring any financial documents you have at the house. Investment statements, anything related to your RRSPs, your non-registered accounts, your joint accounts, everything you can find. Gordon, come tomorrow. We'll go through everything together." I didn't sleep that night. Margaret slept beside me, breathing evenly, her hand curled under her cheek the way she always slept, and I lay flat on my back in the dark and stared at the ceiling and tried to make sense of the arithmetic, the way the superintendent had said it. He had papers. Not he tried to show me papers. He had papers. The papers existed. Someone had filed them somewhere. At 6 in the morning, I got up, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad. I wrote down everything I could think of. Our assets, our accounts, our advisor. His name was Philip Hartley. We had been clients of his for 16 years. He managed our investment portfolio at a private wealth firm in Westboro. Margaret had found him through a friend at her garden club. He was perhaps 52, always well-dressed, always attentive, always remembered our daughter's name and asked about the grandchildren. He came to our house every December to review the year's returns over a glass of wine. He had been at our kitchen table more times than I could count. I wrote his name on the pad, and then I looked at it. Then I wrote Margaret's name underneath it, and I looked at that for a while too. I gathered every document I could find in the house. Bank statements, investment reports, the property deeds I kept in a firebox in the basement closet. I put everything in a canvas bag, and I was out the door before Margaret came downstairs. Gordon's office is on Spark Street, 3 flights up in a building that has been there since the 70s. He was waiting for me with 2 cups of coffee and a face that told me the night had not been easy for him either. He spread the documents on his conference table. He had printed things from the registry office, things from the Law Society database, things I didn't fully understand at first. "Talk to me," I said. He put on his glasses. 11 weeks ago, a power of attorney document was registered with the Ontario Land Registry Office covering all 3 of your properties. The document names Philip Hartley as your attorney in fact. He paused. The signature on the document purports to be yours. I've already looked at it carefully, Ray. I've seen your signature for 30 years. It isn't yours. I put my coffee down very slowly. Additionally, Gordon continued, 3 weeks ago, someone initiated a transfer of title on the Manotick property. The transfer was stopped at the registry level because of a procedural issue with the land transfer tax calculation. That procedural error is the only reason it didn't go through. The only reason? Yes. And the other 2 properties? Filings in progress. If I hadn't checked yesterday, the Lanark Avenue building would have had a transfer filed within the week. Our timing was very close. I sat back in my chair. Outside the window, Spark Street was filling up with the morning commute. People in coats with coffee cups. The ordinary Tuesday of everyone who wasn't sitting in a lawyer's office, learning that someone had been trying to steal their life's work. "There's more," Gordon said. "Tell me." He turned to the investment documents I had brought. He cross-referenced them with statements he had pulled from sources I didn't ask about. Over the past 14 months, a series of redemptions had been made from my non-registered investment account. Small amounts at first. $4,000, $6,000, $11,000, then larger ones. $30,000 in March, $25,000 in July. He turned the paper around so I could see the column of numbers. The total at the bottom was $214,000. "All authorized with your digital credentials and a confirmation code," Gordon said. "But the destination accounts are not yours." "Whose are they?" He hesitated. "One is registered to a numbered corporation. The other appears to be a personal account." He looked at me over his glasses. "I need more time to confirm the second one. But, Ray, I want you to think carefully. Does Margaret have access to your investment account login?" I thought about it. Our passwords were in a small notebook in the kitchen drawer. The one Margaret had put together years ago when we went digital, in case something happened to one of us and the other needed to get into the accounts. I had never thought anything of it. Why would I? "Yes," I said. Gordon nodded slowly. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. I told him I needed a day before we moved on anything. He didn't like it, but he agreed. I had to be certain. I had to understand what I was dealing with before I let it become official and irreversible. I went home. Margaret was in the living room reading. She looked up and smiled and asked if I'd had a good meeting. I said yes. I asked if she wanted to go for a walk. She said it was too cold. I said I'd make lunch. She said that would be lovely. We ate soup at the kitchen table and she talked about a book she was reading and I listened and nodded and handed her the bread and I felt like I was watching myself from a great distance. A man sitting at his own kitchen table not recognizing the person across from him. After lunch, I said I had to run an errand. I drove to Westboro and parked across the street from the investment firm's building. I sat in the car for 20 minutes. Then I went inside and asked to see Philip Hartley. The receptionist said he was with a client. I said I would wait. I waited 35 minutes. When Philip came out, he saw me in the lobby, and his face did something very small and very quick, a tightening around the eyes. gone before most people would have caught it. But I'm 64 years old, and I've been reading job sites and people for 40 years, and I caught it. Ray, he said, smiling, hand outstretched. This is a surprise. Did we have something on the calendar I missed? No, I said. I was just in the neighborhood. I wanted to ask you something about the Q3 statement. It'll only take a minute. We went to his office. He closed the door. I sat across from his desk the way I had sat across from it a dozen times over 16 years, going through returns, talking about RRSPs and TFSAs, and what to do with the rental income. Ordinary conversations. Trusted conversations. I asked him about a line item on the statement, something minor, deliberately minor. He answered it without hesitation, knowledgeable and smooth. We talked for 10 minutes about nothing important, and the whole time I watched his hands, his eyes, the way he breathed, looking for anything. I thanked him and stood to leave. At the door, I turned back. One more thing, I said. Margaret mentioned something about a document she was having you look at. Something to do with estate planning. Did she drop anything off recently? The pause was less than a second. A professional pause, not a guilty one. But there was something in it. Nothing recently, he said. But tell her to call me any time. We're overdue for a review. I nodded and left. He was lying. I didn't know the shape of the lie yet, but I knew it was there. I called Gordon from the car. I need a private investigator, I said. The best one you know. Today. His name was David Charbonneau. He operated out of a small office in Gloucester, and he had spent 20 years with the OPP before going private. Gordon had used him on 3 cases over the years. He was meticulous, quiet, and completely professional. I met him that afternoon, and I told him everything. He asked careful questions and wrote careful notes, and at the end he said he would need 2 weeks, possibly less. It was less. On the 5th day, David sent me photographs. Philip Hartley and my wife, having lunch at a restaurant in the Glebe. Close together, his hand on hers across the table. On the 7th day, photographs of them entering a condominium building on Elgin Street. Separate arrivals, 12 minutes apart, in the early afternoon. On the 9th day, David called me directly. Mr. Ashford, he said, I've been looking at the numbered corporation that received the transferred funds from your investment account. The sole director is listed as Philip Hartley, but the secondary signatory on the corporate bank account is registered to a Margaret Louise Ashford. I was standing in my garage when he said it. I had come back to the habit of sharpening my tools in the evenings. There is something about working with your hands when your mind is too full. You focus on the edge of the blade. You try to make it right. Thank you, I said. Keep going. I called Gordon that evening. He had the full picture by morning. The numbered corporation had been incorporated 14 months ago, which aligned exactly with the first unauthorized withdrawal from my account. The transfers from my investment account totaled $214,000. Philip had used his position as my financial advisor to authorize redemptions using credentials he had obtained from Margaret. He had also prepared the forged power of attorney documents, using a notary who, Gordon's investigation later revealed, was a cousin of his by marriage, and had been suspended by the Law Society of Upper Canada twice in the previous decade. The plan, as best we reconstructed it, was this. The $200,000 in cash was the first phase. The property transfers were the second. Once all 3 properties were in the numbered corporation, they would be sold quietly, and the proceeds laundered through another layer of shell entities. On paper, I would be left with my RRSP accounts, which were locked and harder to touch. But everything else, the properties I had built and maintained for 20 years, the rental income that had been our retirement plan, the non-registered portfolio, would be gone. There was a third element that I had not anticipated. Gordon called me on a Friday morning and asked me to come in. He had a document on his desk when I arrived. He pushed it toward me without a word. It was a referral letter. Philip Hartley had contacted a geriatric assessment clinic in Nepean. The letter described me as a client of 16 years who had been showing signs of cognitive decline, increased suspicion of those around him, difficulty managing financial complexity, memory lapses reported by his spouse. It requested an assessment for capacity to manage financial affairs. If such an assessment concluded that I lacked capacity, Philip would be positioned with a forged power of attorney to manage my affairs permanently. Margaret would be positioned as a cooperating spouse. Between the two of them, they would have legal cover for everything they had already done and everything they planned to do. I read the letter twice. Then I folded it and placed it on Gordon's desk, and I said, "What do we need to do?" Gordon had a list. He had been preparing it, I think, since the first morning I walked into his office. First, he had already filed a caution on all 3 properties at the land registry, which froze any further transfer attempts. Second, he had contacted my bank and flagged all 3 accounts for security review, requiring my personal in-branch authorization for any transactions. Third, he had reached out to a physician he trusted at the Ottawa General, a geriatrician, who agreed to see me for a full cognitive assessment within 48 hours. The assessment took 3 hours. The physician was a careful, thorough woman who asked me to do things with blocks and cards and verbal sequences, and who, at the end, handed me a report that certified my cognitive function was entirely normal, above average for my age group in several measurable categories. I put the report in the inside pocket of my jacket, and I thought about Philip Hartley writing that referral letter in his well-appointed office in Westboro. Then Gordon called the Ontario Securities Commission, and then we went to the Ottawa Police Service, Financial Crimes Unit. What followed were the 2 strangest weeks of my life. I went home each evening and I sat across from my wife at dinner, and I listened to her talk about her book, about the garden, about what Claire had said when she called, and I answered her in full sentences, and I passed the salt, and I asked her how her day was. She had no idea that I knew. She had no idea that David Charbonneau had photographed her entering a condominium building on Elgin Street 11 days before. She had no idea that Gordon had a copy of every document we needed. She slept soundly, and I lay awake counting ceiling tiles and waiting. On a Thursday morning, Gordon called at 7:45. "The warrants are ready," he said, "this afternoon." I drove to Gordon's office. At 2 o'clock, investigators from the Financial Crimes Unit arrested Philip Hartley at his office in Westboro. At 2:30, a second team arrested the notary in Canada at his home. At 3:15, 2 officers came to my house. I opened the door. Margaret was behind me in the hallway, and I heard her breath catch when she saw the uniforms. One officer asked for Margaret Louise Ashford. She said, "That's me," in a voice I had never heard from her before. He told her she was being arrested for fraud over $5,000, conspiracy to commit fraud, and unauthorized use of a financial account. He told her she had the right to retain and instruct counsel without delay, and that she had the right to be informed of that right. She looked at me. I looked back at her. 41 years. The church in Almonte. The farm. Claire in her arms in the hospital with a face like a fist, pink and furious and new. The 20 winters together, the summers. The slow accumulation of an ordinary life that I had believed in completely. "Elijah," she said, and then stopped, and I don't know why she said that name because it isn't mine, and I think she meant to say Raymond, but the shock of the moment had done something to her. She just looked at me, and her face was a thing I didn't recognize. "They have everything, Margaret," I said. "I've had everything for 2 weeks." She began to cry. She was still crying when they put her in the cruiser. I stood in the doorway of my own house and watched the car go down the street and turn the corner. And then the street was empty and quiet, just the October light on the neighbor's maple tree, gold and orange and still. I went inside. I sat in the kitchen. I called Claire. That was the hardest call I have ever made. She drove up from Kingston that night. She arrived at 10 o'clock with red eyes and a look on her face that I recognized as the same look she had when she was 9 years old, and I had told her that our dog had died. She came through the door and hugged me without speaking for a long time. We sat at the kitchen table, and I told her everything, from the superintendent's phone call to the arrest that afternoon. I told it plainly, without dramatizing it, just the sequence of facts. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she sat quiet for a moment. "How long did you know?" she asked. "About 2 weeks. And you didn't tell me. I needed to protect you. If you'd confronted your mother before we had everything ready, she would have moved faster or disappeared." Claire looked at the table. Pop. Philip Hartley has been at our Christmas dinners. I know. He gave the boys hockey cards last year. I know. She reached across the table and took my hand. We sat like that for a while, not saying much, listening to the house settle around us. The legal process took several months. Gordon guided me through each step, explaining every document I signed, every filing, every motion. Philip Hartley retained an experienced criminal defense lawyer and initially pleaded not guilty to all charges. His lawyer's strategy was to place the primary responsibility on the notary, positioning Philip as a victim of a fraudulent scheme he had been drawn into. The notary's lawyer attempted the reverse, claiming Philip was the architect. The OSC investigation was thorough and ultimately damaging to both of them. They had used the same structure on 2 previous clients, both of them older, both of them isolated from family. One was a widower in his 70s in Barhaven who lost his entire non-registered portfolio before discovering the transfers. The other was an elderly couple in Stittsville who had been told by their investment advisor, Philip Hartley, that their accounts had underperformed significantly and had believed him without checking because they trusted him. At trial, the pattern of conduct destroyed Philip's defense. The Crown prosecutor presented the evidence methodically. The forged documents with expert handwriting analysis, the corporate filings, the bank transfers, the referral letter to the assessment clinic, David Charbonneau's surveillance photographs, and the statements of the previous victims. Philip's counsel argued that his client had been genuinely in a relationship with a woman who had deceived him about her husband's wishes. The jury did not accept this. He was convicted on 11 counts, including fraud over $5,000, forgery, conspiracy, breach of fiduciary duty, and unauthorized securities trading. The judge sentenced him to 9 years. The Law Society of Ontario permanently revoked his license. The notary received 4 years and was permanently struck from the notarial role. Margaret had entered into discussions with the Crown's office through her own counsel within days of her arrest. She cooperated fully. She provided a complete account of the relationship with Philip, of how it had begun at a client appreciation event 3 years earlier, of how gradually his plan had taken shape through late-night conversations she had believed were about securing our future, of how she had persuaded herself that what they were doing was a kind of private settlement of what she felt she was owed. She felt she was owed. I have thought about that many times since. Her counsel negotiated a conditional sentence and 2 years of supervised probation. She made restitution from the portion of the transferred funds that had been in accounts jointly accessible to her. She did not fight the divorce. Gordon managed the divorce proceedings with the same efficiency he brought to everything else. The settlement was straightforward. I kept the properties. I kept the investment accounts, which had been frozen and then restored. Margaret retained her RRSP, her car, and the contents of her personal bank account. The marital home was sold. I bought her portion at assessed value. She took an apartment in Canada. I signed the last document on a Wednesday morning in February. When I got back to my car, I sat in the parking lot for a while. Snow was falling, the soft, heavy kind that comes in February in Ottawa and makes the city look briefly like somewhere else. 41 years. A marriage is a long, complicated structure, and when it ends, you don't feel one thing. You feel something with no name that keeps changing shape. Claire and her husband and the boys moved in with me for a month, while the house felt strange. We ate dinner together every night. The boys are 7 and 9, and they ask direct questions with no diplomacy whatsoever, which is one of the best things about children that age. The older one asked me one evening why Grandma wasn't coming for Christmas. I said Grandma was going to be spending Christmas somewhere else this year. He thought about it and said, "Okay, can we still get the big tree?" "Yes," I said. "We can still get the big tree." We got the big tree. We put it up in the living room where it has always gone, and we decorated it with the ornaments Claire has known since she was a child. The clay handprint she made in grade 2, the little wooden bear from the craft fair in Almonte, the glass balls that catch the light. The boys ran in circles and knocked things over and ate too many of the shortbread cookies Claire made, and I sat in my chair and watched all of it and felt something quiet and solid underneath the ordinary noise of the evening. In the spring, I began giving talks at senior centers around the city. The Ottawa Center for Active Aging, the Glebe Center, a community organization in Barhaven that works with isolated older adults. I spoke plainly about what had happened, about how financial abuse of older Canadians works, about the warning signs, about who to call and when. The OSC has resources. The Canadian Anti-Fraud Center has a dedicated line. Gordon prepared a simple one-page document I hand out at every talk. Straightforward language, clear steps. At the second talk I gave, a woman came up to me afterward. She was perhaps 70, well-dressed, careful eyes. She said her financial advisor had been making her feel confused in their meetings lately, making her feel like she couldn't follow things she used to understand easily, and she hadn't told her son because she didn't want him to worry, but she thought something was wrong. I sat with her for 45 minutes. I gave her Gordon's number and the fraud center number, and I told her to bring her son to the next meeting with her advisor. I told her that confusion in those meetings is sometimes manufactured deliberately. I told her that if something feels wrong, something is wrong, and that asking for help is not weakness. She called Gordon the following week. The investigation into her advisor is ongoing. Philip Hartley sent a letter from the institution where he is serving his sentence. I read it once. He said that he understood what he had done, and that he did not expect forgiveness, and that he wanted me to know that his feelings for Margaret had been genuine, which I suppose he thought was worth saying. He said he was sorry. I put the letter in the box where I keep the case documents. I did not reply. There was nothing to say to him. He had looked at my life and decided it was available. He had calculated my trust into an asset he could move. He was wrong about me, and now he has 9 years to think about exactly how wrong. Margaret sent a letter through her counsel 6 months after the divorce was finalized. She said she was sorry. She said she didn't expect anything from me. She said she hoped Claire would one day find a way to let her back in, even partially, even just to know the boys were growing up well. She said she knew she had no right to ask for anything. I forwarded the letter to Claire without comment. That is between the two of them. Claire has seen her mother twice. I don't know what was said, and I don't need to know. Some things belong to them. My life now has a different shape. I wake up early, as I always have. I make coffee in a kitchen that is quiet in a way I am learning to live inside. I manage the properties myself again, walking the buildings, talking to the tenants, fixing things that need fixing. There is satisfaction in that I had forgotten, the specific satisfaction of work done with your hands on something real and yours. David Charbonneau called me in the fall to tell me that the third victim, the couple in Stittsville, had received their full restitution from Philip's assets, which had been seized and liquidated. He said it doesn't always work out that way, and I should know it had this time. I thanked him. On a Sunday afternoon in November, I drove out to a property I own in Manotick, the one where the transfer was stopped by a clerical error in the land transfer tax calculation. I stood in the yard and looked at the building, the same building I had repaired and maintained for 18 years, and I thought about how close I had come, a decimal point in a tax filing, a superintendent who trusted his instincts, a lawyer who answered his phone on a Tuesday afternoon, luck and preparation, and the willingness to stay quiet long enough to do it right. I am 64 years old. I worked with my hands for 35 years, and I built something that is mine. I know every property I own, the way you know a thing. You have shaped yourself. The cold spots, the pipes that need watching, the roof that will need replacing in 5 years. No one is going to take that from me. Silently, and with everything I had, I made sure of it. And that, I have learned, is what a man can do. Not shout, not collapse, not plead for an explanation. Simply refuse, gather what he needs, wait for the right moment, and then, without looking back, close the door on everything that tried to destroy him and walk forward into whatever comes next. The maple in front of the house on Lanark Avenue is going orange again. I noticed it last week when I did my walkthrough. It goes orange every October, exactly like this. Every year, I have owned that building. I stood on the sidewalk and looked at it for a while. Just a tree doing what it does, reliably, without drama, year after year. I thought that was enough. I thought that was more than enough.